And with that, I am going to begin to get us started here today, folks, because we do have quite a packed agenda. I wanted to start off by saying thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. Good afternoon, and thank you. We are so excited for our May Food System Advocacy Community Call. Because of our packed agenda, I want to make sure to kind of get us moving here really quickly. My name, for those that don't know, is Jack Ewert. I am a staff member here at the Montgomery County Food Council. And to get us started, as you see, I am having just folks introduce themselves in the chat, where I am also going to, as soon as I pull it up, I am going to add in our agenda for today. I'm sending our agenda right now.
Jack, you've become such a good multitasker.
Sending our agenda out right now. We are really excited for today's call. Like I said, it is a bit of a packed agenda, and we'll be covering several different topics. But because of that packed agenda, I am going to start us off by turning it over to my colleague, Michelle Caruso, to give us a small update on the Montgomery County 2025 fiscal year operating budget. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Michelle.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. So hopefully folks saw an email that I sent earlier today with some updates to the final budget that was approved via straw vote last week and will be approved tomorrow formally by County Council. There were a few surprises compared to what had happened in public hearings that we at the Food Council were pretty disappointed to find out about. And so we have created a sign-on letter that expresses some of those concerns and shares with County Council, our belief that the process was not as transparent as it could have been, and that, County Council, I did not use this word in the letter, but perhaps is being a little bit short-sighted. And I'll give some examples as to what changed that we were surprised about. So first, $60,000 in new funding was cut that was going to support SNAP outreach and enrollment. That money was projected over 3 years to bring in $2 million in federal support to the county. The second big surprise was that, similar to last year, they took what used to be called the Food Staples Program funding and is now called, I will never remember, like Community Competitive Food Grants funding, and cut it in half, which, as most folks on this call know, will mean that there needs to be a special appropriation halfway through the year to fully fund the rest of the need. But the big problem that we've heard with that approach is that it doesn't give organizations the ability to plan, because there's no guarantee that the other half of the funding will actually come about through a special appropriation. And so it limits what people can do now instead of allowing them to plan for the full funding. So it really impacts our food assistance providers and communities who need that assistance. So we're really disappointed in that approach, and that approach was followed again this year after some pretty, I think, a lot of information about how it worked last year and how, that was not the right way to handle the situation, in our opinion and many of our partners' opinions. And then, as many of you know, the Food Council, in partnership with County Council and many of you on this call, released the Strategic Plan to End Childhood Hunger last year. That resulted in a special appropriation last year where some grants were created to help implement that plan through the Office of Food Systems Resilience. The grant funding was actually increased for the full fiscal year this year, which is great news, that plan will continue to be implemented. However, the contract monitor position that the Office for Food System Resilience had requested to help manage the increased funding coming out of their office was also cut from the final budget, sort of unexpectedly compared to what had happened in the public hearings. And so, we have concerns that that will limit the impact of the grants and limit the oversight and monitoring from what could have occurred and what we could learn through this kind of innovative pilot of these programs and initiatives that came out of a community-based planning process. So if your organization or an organization that you know about might be interested in signing on to our letter expressing our feelings, I think Jack probably dropped it in the chat, a link to the Google Doc or the Google form. There's a link to the text of the letter in that form as well. And we welcome you to consider signing on if you're interested by the end of today, because the vote will happen tomorrow. So we want to send the letter before the vote occurs, although we don't anticipate that the budget will change. So I don't know that I can answer tons of questions, but happy to just open the floor for a minute if anyone else on the call wants to share anything. And I might call on Jackie just because, Jackie and I have had several conversations about this to see if there's anything she wants to share.
You beat me to it, Michelle, because I was going to raise my hand. So first of all, I just want to thank the Food Council for doing such an excellent job of articulating and laying out what was, what is the problem with this. And so I really encourage you. I understand it's a quick turnaround, but if you have any authority to sign on, I really encourage you to sign on for your organizations. And I can't say better than the sign-on letter. So just adding our voice is really important because I think it sets the tenor for the conversations that we're going to need to have with the County Council and the Office of Food System Resilience if a special appropriation for that competitive process, what's known as the Food Staples Program, is to happen. So that's just my rah-rah go team. Let's make this happen. But my question actually, Michelle, is could you just spell out briefly why $60,000 means 2 million lost? Like, was there matching funds at some sort of ratio, or do you happen to know why? Because I think that's a pretty compelling point that the county just let $2 million go.
Yeah, I think, and I'll call on my colleague Allison, actually, because she just came on video, and I think that those numbers came from her. So go for it, Allison.
Yeah, hi, everyone. So I think some of you know, so the Montgomery County Food Council, same as MANA, Maryland Hunger Solutions, we're part of a state SNAP outreach program that reimburses us for 50% of our work related to SNAP. Food Council also recently became a lead organization where we can take subgrantees under us. So we have expanded the number of subgrantee organizations that are under us, and the 60,000 was meant to support the work to coordinate all of the work of the subgrantees. And we recently just submitted the 3-year plan to DHS, and that was a $4 million overall budget, 2 million of which would be reimbursed back into Montgomery County. So it's just that money, very small amount of money, would have supported a large effort here in Montgomery County. We will still be going forward with this effort, and so are our subgrantees, but under-resourced to be able to do it.
And Allison, did you share how that $2 million number came about?
So yeah, so the 3-year budget for all of the subgrantees for their SNAP outreach work, that's a $4 million budget. And so then the federal funds through the state would reimburse for half of that, which is the 2 million.
Okay, thanks. I probably was reading the chat and missed when you said that.
Of course.
Any other comments? And I appreciate Tara Clemens Johnson, her comment in the chat. The 60K was new funding on top of existing funding, to my understanding, that was cut. But
Correct.
Thank you, Tara. Any other comments or thoughts? I do really appreciate that this call was timed. We did not plan ahead, but it was timed so that we could all kind of process this information and put out a sign-on letter and at least, learn from each other about what occurred in close to real time. So I really appreciate folks that spoke up and asked questions. Jackie, appreciate it. Allison. And I think with that, Jack, I'm going to turn it back over to you to facilitate the rest of our agenda.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. And speaking of agenda, I'm dropping into the chat just one more time, and I'll make sure before the end of the call, I drop the sign-in letter link again, just to be sure that everyone has that. We are going to switch kind of focuses here because our before this popped up over the past few days, our original focus for this call was around the 2024 Maryland legislative session. So I'm really thankful to Delegate Julie Palakovich Carr for joining us today. I made you a co-host, Delegate. I don't know if you had plans to share any slides, but I made you a co-host just in case, or if anything happens, because it's the Zoom world. And I'm just gonna give a quick introduction and turn it on over to you. Delegate Julie Palakovich Carr has served in the Maryland House of Delegates representing District 17, Gaithersburg and Rockville since January of 2019. She serves on the House Ways and Means Committees, where she chairs the Early Childhood Subcommittee. Julie has championed legislation to ease barriers to voting, make roads safer for pedestrians and bicyclists, and to close corporate tax loopholes. Julie serves as chair of the Montgomery County House delegation, as a deputy whip and secretary of the Transit Caucus. She previously served as vice chair of the Legislative Review Committee for the Maryland Legislative Latino Caucus and as vice chair of the Montgomery County House Democratic Caucus. She previously served 2 terms on the Rockville City Council, where she championed progressive reforms such as banning smoking in outdoor dining areas, protecting law-abiding immigrants from deportation, and improving safety for pedestrians, bicyclists, and people in vehicles. And with that, I want to say thank you again and turn it over to you, Delegate Palakovich Carr.
Thank you, Jack. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Great to be with you today to debrief a bit from the 2024 legislative session. This was my 6th session in the legislature, and I feel like every year I come out and I, report out to various groups and I say, oh, what a productive session it was. And I always mean it. And I think the bar gets set a little higher and a little higher each year. And my staff actually pointed out to me that this year, we apparently passed a record number of bills. Now, I'm not sure how far back they look, but I could actually believe this maybe was for all time, because more than 1,000 bills passed the General Assembly and went to the governor and his team for review. And at this point, they have finished all of the bill signings last week. And I think all but a very tiny number, single-digit number of those bills have become law. So just incredibly productive all around. Happy just to talk for a bit about what happened in terms of food systems and then some related topics, and then we can open this up for questions. So on the food front, this was, I'd say, a pretty good session. Now, I'll say that from my perspective as somebody who serves on the Ways and Means Committee. So we deal a lot with like tax policy, but also education. So sorry if I have any blind spots here, and if there were big things that maybe you all were working on that didn't pass in other committees, but just want to highlight some of the wins from this session. So starting with SNAP benefits, had a very good session there. I know there were multiple bills introduced, but ultimately we were able to expand eligibility as well as the benefits for SNAP benefits for seniors. So now people who are age 60 or 61 are now eligible for that senior SNAP program. And then we did increase the minimum benefits from $40 to $50 per month. So not a huge change, but definitely moving in the right direction, which is a good thing to see. On the education front, we have made the free breakfast program, the Maryland Meals for Achievement program, more flexible. And I'm sorry, I should mention that SNAP bill was sponsored by my colleague, Delegate Emily Shetty and Senator Corey McCray. But for free breakfasts in schools, we've added some key flexibility on that front so that elementary schools can just have an additional options, including offering a grab-and-go cart for kids to get a breakfast and take that back to their classroom to eat. And that passed, and that was sponsored thanks to my colleagues, Delegate Jessica Feldmark and Senator Shelley Hedelman. In addition, on school meals, this session was the 3rd year, I think, as you're all aware, that we were fighting for universal free school meals. Senator Guy Gazzoni has championed this for a number of years, and it was my first year working on this, picking up after former Delegate Kirill Resnick. And I'll say, I think we continue to make progress, although something passed. It was not actually anything that puts meals in front of kids, unfortunately, or more dollars in our schools. And I'll talk a little bit more in depth about what we did pass this year. But just to give some context, I do think we are building momentum on this front. This year, really, the fiscal challenges in the state. I know probably people say that every year, and it's kind of true, but I think this year was especially a challenging year in terms of the state's finances, because the big fight between the House and the Senate really was about, are we going to raise new revenues to pay for very targeted things, including education and transportation, or are we going to kick the can? And the House ultimately came on the side of, like, we need to tackle this, and we actually passed pretty significant revenue raising package, both for transportation and education purposes. Didn't completely solve the problem, but would have made a really, taken a really big bite out of what we knew we needed in additional funding. But the Senate didn't want to go there, at least not on the education and kind of general fund side this year. So although in the end we did pass over $300 million in new transportation revenues, we did not pass anything for any other program. So those transportation dollars are very targeted in terms of like the fund that they go to and what they can be used for. So I think that's an issue that we're going to have to come back on. So what does that mean for universal free school meals? There, again, continues to be really strong support for this idea, but it's like, where does the money come from? And I know folks on this call have been involved very in depth on this legislation and this effort for a number of years. But ultimately where we came out was we felt like it was good to show that there is some momentum, because we are building that behind the scenes within the legislature with the administration, the governor and his team. And so what passed was a bill that requires the State Department of Education to actually come up with a more finessed estimate of what it's going to cost to do universal free school meals, as well as to take a look at programs in other states. So I think having that, more specific cost estimate is going to be helpful when we come back with the legislation for next year, because there was a little bit of disagreement this year with the fiscal note for the bill in terms of like, what will this program actually cost? And then like, therefore, what do we need to budget for it? So that has been signed into law. Another bill that I worked on this year that I was really pleased passed has to do with protections for kids who have food allergies. My son is an elementary school student and has a very severe food allergy. So this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. Last year, we passed legislation, Senator Clarence Lamb and I, to make our schools, public schools, safer for kids who have food allergies. And actually just at the end of last summer, the Department of Health and the State Department of Education came out with new guidelines for our schools about how to make their facilities safer for kids with food allergies. And additionally, starting with next school year, public schools are actually going to be required to disclose all of the ingredients in all the foods they serve in their cafeteria. A decent number, most school systems across the state were already doing this, but they weren't all. So that's just going to be a good protection for kids and if the staff are eating in the cafeterias. So really, the next logical thought with this was, given that we've addressed the K-12 ecosystem, is childcare. So as Jack mentioned, I chair the early childhood subcommittee. Everything related to childcare, preschool is in my subcommittee. So we put together a bill this year that really builds off of the work from last year to make sure that our childcare providers have the information that they need. So if they have a child in their care who has a severe life-threatening food allergy, that they know what they should be doing in terms of prevention, how to respond if there is an emergency, et cetera. So really, really glad to get that across the finish line this year. And then the last bill I'll mention on the food, specifically on the food side, came from Delegate Tavares and Senator Benson. This was another new bill idea, but making sure that baby food doesn't have toxic metals in it. Seems like really like, do we need a law for this? Apparently we did, because the FDA does regulate this, but I guess there's just not enough accountability and testing going on. So really the new piece that the state's going to be doing is requiring baby food manufacturers to actually undergo testing to make sure that they are in compliance with federal law and regulations, which is a good thing that we're, keeping the littlest ones safe here. So those were the bills that I saw as I kind of looked back through, again, those 1,000+ bills that were specific to food systems. My apologies if I've missed anything. There were a few other areas that I thought were worth talking about that are related to this, because I think I bring this up every time I speak with this group, but of course, like, money is fungible. So, if people have more money in their pockets because we're doing things on housing or tax credits or whatever else, that does give them more opportunity to actually get the food that they need. So this year we took some other actions specific to reducing childhood poverty and providing services for very low income families who have kids. I think the one that I'll say is probably like one of the biggest accomplishments from this session that doesn't seem to be getting its due, and I'm hoping like the press catches up on this, really is the historic investments that we made in the state's child care scholarship program. Nearly $500 million. I think it was $488 million, which is a record level of funding for that program that Governor Moore and his team identified early on, and I give them huge props for figuring this out and including this in their governor's budget from the get-go so the legislature could maintain that funding. But this is a program that is very targeted to low-income families. Most of the time, it's a single parent who's working or going back to school, and providing them with heavily subsidized childcare in the childcare provider of their choice. It's a really great program because of some other legislative changes we've made in the last few years. We're now at a point where over 30,000 children across the state participate in this program. And it means that they are, getting high quality childcare, getting the services that they need to be prepared to go into kindergarten, and allowing their parents to work, because we know that lack of affordable and high quality childcare continues to be a huge barrier for many Marylanders in terms of participating in the workforce. So looking back to not that many months ago, we were looking at the prospect of that we were going to have a wait list, that the program is going to be frozen, no new kids were going to be able to enter the program. And also the State Department of Education was proposing that because of this kind of looming fiscal problem that somewhat had to do with the ending of certain pandemic federal dollars, that they were going to start assessing a copay on families who were already participating in the program. So this is one of my colleagues likes to point out, like, this basically was going to be a tax on very low income families with little kids. So it was really great that, the administration, the legislature was able to work together this session to make sure that the program is still there, that we are not assessing new copays on families who are participating, and that it remains open for additional families who are eligible to join the program. So really a big win on that front. The legislature also passed one of the governor's priority bills, the Enough Act, which is focused on reducing childhood poverty in particular parts of the state where there has been historically big problems on that front. Another administration priority this year really was about housing. And I think it's been interesting just to read the news and kind of debrief some other states. Housing was, I think, a topic that was top of mind kind of across the nation. We know the lack of affordable housing, but lack of housing at all price points continues to be a huge problem. It's been years in the making, but it's been really interesting to see policymakers from both parties and from across the country really recognize this issue and work on tackling it this year. So we passed a lot of bills on housing. I won't go into details on everything, but it was everything from density bonuses for new housing, especially near transit or on formerly state-owned properties, to a new financing model that is based off of what we already are doing here in Montgomery County. We passed bills that have to do with renters' rights and how information that on, say, a credit report gets used by a landlord to make a decision about a potential renter. And I feel like I'm missing something else on that front. But anyways, a lot on housing. So I don't think it's, we can't solve the problem in 1 year, but I think we made a lot of progress this year. And certainly in my 6 sessions in the legislature, this was the most on housing that I've seen us do by far. And then on the tax front, this was another, active area, I would say, specifically in terms of addressing the needs of lower income Marylanders. We saw that from the top, Comptroller Brooke Learman, among her, I think, 6 priority bills for this session, one of which was funding an information campaign so that they can really targeted informational outreach to Marylanders, low-income Marylanders who are eligible for, say, the Earned Income Tax Credit, the EITC, but other tax credits, so that they can really try to, get the information before the people who are eligible for these credits, but who maybe aren't applying. The EITC, for instance, about 25% of Marylanders who are eligible for that credit actually don't claim it. So we have a lot of work still to do on that front. And then importantly, we also made some, let's say, less sexy but important changes to some other tax credits that exist to help lower income Marylanders, like the homeowners property tax credit or the renters property tax credit, really to make it easier for people to apply for those credits, to receive them, even to apply retroactively. And then on the homeowner front, to actually help keep people out of tax sale. So those were some good technical bills that came both from the administration as well as some of my colleagues in the legislature on that front. So, I think zooming back out here, like I said, I really do feel like this was a good session. We got a lot done. Doesn't mean we got everything done. Certainly on universal free school meals, we we still have to continue our work on that front. But, starting to think ahead to the next legislative session, I think kind of the key factors we should all be thinking about is that one, the state's fiscal challenges haven't gone away. Like I said, we ended up kicking the can. So we're still in a situation of where, say, for the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, our education reform bill, we did buy a little bit more time. The program is still fully funded now through fiscal year 2027, but starting in fiscal year 2028, there's going to be about a $3 billion shortfall in that program. There's also just kind of a sense, I would say, from some of my colleagues that the state's general fund, and which supports all other kinds of programs, pretty much, that things are tight. We're feeling the squeeze on that front. Again, as the pandemic dollars have dried up, I think that helped to make things, work a little bit better. But people who serve on the appropriations committee definitely are, saying about that is a challenge. So I think we have to, think about those fiscal challenges going forward. And I'd say the other piece just is like, the administration now has had 2 sessions under their belt, like not even a year and a half in office. But I think we've seen really like how well the administration and the legislature are working together on a lot of issues. And I think this year, and looking ahead, I think there's a lot of potential to continue to try to like work things behind the scenes. And I still kind of hold out hope that maybe on school meals, like maybe the governor actually like steps off the sidelines on this one. We'll see. That's kind of still work in progress. But I think on other issues, like there's still the opportunity to have, if he and his administration come forward on something, the legislature will be deferential. We saw that for the most part with his priority bills this session. So I'm happy to stop there, take whatever questions there are.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Delegate. Like you said, we're going to open up the floor for questions. I know I have a few questions, but I want to open up the floor to the audience first. Feel free to either raise your hand or come off mute. And as folks are kind of thinking about their questions, I'm also going to drop into the chat our public policy tracker, which encapsulates our work during the legislative session, including testimony and sign-ons, as well as some of the coalitions that we participated in during this session. But like I said, I want to open up this as a chance for anyone and everyone to ask any questions they may have. And if not, I'm happy to get us started with a question to get the ball rolling. I have a few, but I want to start because you touched on school meals for all there at the end specifically. So I thought I'd start with my question around that, and then more of one directly related to kind of budget concerns. But my question around school meals for all is, do you have any advice, or maybe advice isn't the right word, or kind of guidance for starting advocacy efforts for next year's legislation? So knowing that the bill will come back around again next year, do you have any advice for small organizations or individuals of how they can begin that advocacy or those advocacy efforts now, looking forward to, although it seems like far away, it always comes around so quickly. So looking kind of forward, how can we begin to prepare ourselves for another go at such important legislation?
Definitely. So, I mean, first of all, a huge shout out to and thank you to everyone who's been involved with the coalition that's been, building the momentum on this bill now for 3 sessions. I think you collectively do excellent work. I think with thinking ahead to next session, I have a couple thoughts there. One is that I think on an individual basis, you'll find, well, especially here in Montgomery County, I think everyone's going to say that they're supportive. And if you look at like the number of co-sponsors on the bill, like I think on the House bill, we had like 60 co-sponsors or something, like bipartisan support. Like you're not going to find people who are like, no, we're against that. And again, on the House side, like all of my colleagues, I think all of my colleagues in Montgomery County, I'd have to double check, voted for at least some of the revenue, part of the revenue package. So people are willing to, do what it takes to fund government. I think this all kind of falls, though, into this broader strategy of like what's going on with the Senate. And I'll say it is not clear to me what the Senate's strategy is. Like, I don't know if they're hoping more federal money comes or that the economy improves enough that we don't need to do something. They're waiting till after the next election in 2026. It's hard to say, but I do feel like having conversations with senators, and I'd say including senators in Montgomery County, I'm not sure that they know specifically, especially if they don't serve, let's say, on the Budget and Tax Committee, like exactly what situation that we're at in terms of the state's revenues and what that means for programs like this and others. So, I think having, quiet, no pressure conversations over the summer and fall to educate people could be helpful.
So thank you so much. And as Michelle said, as I'm about to turn it over to her, feel free to drop questions in the chat as well.
Jack and I are good at dominating the questions if we need to. But that's not the intent of this meeting, so feel free to raise your hand. Delegate, I just wanted to hone in a little bit on what you touched on related to the revenue differences between the House and Senate that occurred this past session. And also what you said about maybe Governor Moore will get off the sidelines and make it a priority for his state budget this year. I don't foresee, I could be wrong. Like, I think I would be surprised if, let's say the governor does support this and now it is universal school meals, like universal. Like, do you have a I mean, I think as advocates, we would shoot for that, but like, do you have thoughts on ways, given the fiscal situation that we're in, that this can be incrementally implemented over like a 10-year or 5-year period through legislation? Do you have like additional thoughts on how do we get something done that does add meals and actually doesn't just study the problem, which I appreciate that we got something that will inform the bill this year, but just could you expand a little bit on your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. And I'll say that in terms of the state's revenues, that new revenue forecasts come out 3 times a year, and we're in that time period where we won't have any new information till September. So like my guess is on a lot of fronts, including this one, like it's going to be hard to gauge somewhat strategy wise till we see those September estimates. But, looking back over the last year or two, the estimates have been pretty accurate, and they have also been, I won't say dire, but like not great. So it's like every estimate's like, oh, well, the economy's growing, but by less than we thought that it would. And then the next one comes out and says the same thing. And then again and again. So we'll probably be on that path again for September, but we won't know till we get there. So that's one piece. Yeah, I mean, I think, Michelle, the idea of an incremental approach is very consistent with how lots of things happen in the General Assembly. It can be frustrating at times. It also can be just, I don't know, useful to know that right, lots of things on lots of topics will just, you take one little step, and then once you get that done, you try to take another step. That pretty rarely do things happen in like one big fell swoop. So, I mean, I think that is potentially a viable pathway to go on for this next session, to try to get something, and I think if we're talking in the realm of single-digit millions, that probably is fairly realistic. But I think the question, especially on this issue, given the history, given just kind of the in-depth involvement across the state, is it's like, where ultimately does the coalition that's been backing this bill fall? Like, will most organizations get behind that or not? And I know that that's been a bit of a debate in the past about where to go. So, and I think then, I guess, to circle back here, particularly in terms of like a strategy of getting the governor on board, it's hard to say. And I think until folks have that conversation with the administration here post-session to kind of see where they're at, and my guess is they might kick the can until they have a better sense of like what the revenue forecasts are. But yeah, I mean, I guess I wouldn't take it off the table that we might do something very big, but I also could foresee that we end up doing something smaller. And I think the last piece just to be cognizant of is like, from a strategy perspective, is will we try to tie this particular piece of legislation to a particular funding source? And I know that there's been the start of conversations around that. People have tried that with other issues, not education related in the past. It tends not to work. So what I've seen more likely to happen is that people agree that the thing should get funded, and then they find some other way through the general fund and through the budgeting process to fund said thing. But I don't think there's a downside necessarily of trying to come up with a revenue source to pay for school meals to offset the bill's cost. I guess, yeah, haven't seen where that has backfired, let's say.
Thank you. I really appreciate just your candor and just kind of explaining the, you're being optimistic, but like realistic also. And I just really appreciate that perspective. I think it's been frustrating for a lot of advocates to not see this bill move for 3 years in a row. Especially given the potential opportunity earlier on, like this year, I think we had the least chance given the fiscal situation, but it's just been a frustrating situation that we've seen other states lead on when usually Maryland is one of those leaders, and certainly something we all are interested in, or I would say, I don't want to speak for everyone on the call, but I know folks here care a lot about that.
Yeah. I'll say one other piece on this bill. We didn't include it in the study bill, but the committee analyst who staffs my subcommittee and the education subcommittee said that he would do some additional research on some other pieces, because I think there's some other arguments that we can use, like especially in terms of tying like school meals to the blueprint, that could be helpful. And so like he's doing that with my chair's blessing this summer. So, I think we, like I said, we're building momentum. Is it fast enough? Is it enough? No, but like, at least, this isn't a bill where like sometimes bills do stall and it's just like, there's nothing happening and you're not sure how you can do anything different. And I don't see that as the case for this. It's just like, we're just not there yet.
Yeah, thanks. And just related, I see Mary asked in the chat whether the study will include cost estimates for incremental implementation.
I don't think we specified that specifically, but we did ask for particular breakdowns from MSDE. So they should be providing enough of granular data that I think we could use that to come up with an incremental approach.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask out one last.
Did he freeze for everyone? Oh, Jack, you froze briefly, but you're back.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
I see another question in the chat from Michael. Is there any place in your opinion, for federal advocacy when it comes to school meals?
Yes. So I know Congress is reauthorizing the Farm Bill this year, and historically that has been a mechanism for which like SNAP and other food programs get addressed. I'll say I'm not following that particularly closely, so I don't know if maybe someone on this call is and knows if there's anything on that front to talk about. I don't know. In general, like the federal fiscal situation, for like as bad as things are in Maryland, it feels worse at the federal level, especially with like the funding targets that the House has set for non-defense programs, and like that there's going to be like cuts pretty much like for most programs. So, I mean, is there room for advocacy? Yes. I don't know if it'll be fruitful or not, I guess would be my answer.
I also wanted to give Elizabeth from Maryland Hunger Solutions to see if she wanted to chime in with anything around the Farm Bill specifically. And also that we are hoping that next month to focus some of this call on the Farm Bill as well.
Yeah, so very quickly, we are, Maryland Hunger Solutions is an initiative of the Food Research and Action Center in Washington, D.C. And so FRAC, being our parent organization, is very engaged on Farm Bill advocacy. And primarily we're looking at protecting and strengthening SNAP. Emphasis on protecting. We had a bill that I believe dropped this week on the House side, which includes some pretty severe cuts to SNAP over time. So we have a sign-on letter, which I'll drop the link in the chat. If folks, that we are not looking for individual signatures, we're looking for organizational sign-ons. The deadline for signing on is next Wednesday. And we also have a lobby day on, I feel like I talked about this on another MoCo Food Council call, but we have a lobby day on Wednesday, June 5th, where we will be visiting our US congresspersons and senators. And so if you want to follow up with me, I'll drop my email in the chat, and we can get you signed up to join other Maryland advocates on that day in Washington, D.C.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. I also am happy to share that information in both the sign-on and the information about the lobby day, which I'm hoping to join, in our follow-up notes that will go out before next Wednesday, so before the deadline for that sign-on. So I'll make sure that gets into the follow-up notes as well. Yeah, thank you. Last call for any questions for Delegate Palakovich Carr. And seeing none, I'm going to say thank you again so much for joining us. We always appreciate it, and appreciate, as Michelle said, the honesty and candor. Oh, did I just see a question? I did see a quick question in the chat. Is there from Lee McNair, is there a possibility of starting pilot programs where students grow and prepare their own meals and making the connection between health and exercise and other kind of areas?
Oh, that I think is a new idea that I don't recall seeing anything in terms of legislation on, but happy to chat more. I'll put my contact information in the chat. So, if you want to follow up with me, and I'll say on anything, if there's anything that my office can do to be helpful, or people just have questions, whatever, please reach out. We're here as a resource.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Delegate, for joining us. And as always, we appreciate it and are happy to pass along questions or kind of facilitate if needed. And we just really appreciate the time during after such a busy time of year where so much is going on, and we just really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks for the invite.
Awesome, thank you. Next up on our agenda is, and Elizabeth, let me know if I am turning to you or JD, and also if you would like screen shareability if needed, but we're going to turn it over to Maryland Hunger Solutions to continue this conversation about the legislative session and specifically focusing on food security.
Awesome. Thank you, Jack. I'm going to start out, and if I miss anything, JD is here to back me up. And so, yeah, really good to be with everybody today. My name is Elizabeth Epps. I use she, her pronouns, and I am Deputy Director at Maryland Hunger Solutions. I think most of you are probably familiar with Maryland Hunger Solutions, but we are a statewide outreach and advocacy organization focused on improving participation in the federal nutrition programs. And so actually, Delegate Palakovich Carr discussed most of the updates I was going to give about the legislative session. So thank you, Julie, for those wonderful updates about the SNAP supplemental bill and the universal meals bill. Those were honestly our two key priorities in the 2024 session. And so I don't want to go into too much detail about those two bills, but very grateful for the leadership of Delegate Palakovich Carr on the House side for the universal meals bill. So just very quickly, I did want to touch on another victory, which was actually, this is kind of rare, but we are victorious in preventing a bill from being passed this session. So HB 1434 was a bill that would have amended a very successful bill that was passed last year to make sure that people who are experiencing SNAP and other EBT benefit theft are fully reimbursed by the Department of Human Services, either through federal funds or through state funds. So we were very pleased with the passage of the bill in 2023 on SNAP reimbursements. And the program has been running pretty smoothly as far as people applying for reimbursements to DHS and receiving their reimbursements. There have been some hiccups along the way, and actually Baltimore Banner has been doing some really good reporting on all of what's been going on with the benefit theft and reimbursement. So I would encourage you to check out the Banner for their reporting. But basically, the Department of Human Services worked with a legislator on the House side to introduce an amendment bill this year in recognition of concern about funds running out for reimbursing households that experience theft. And so this bill would have taken away the mandate for DHS to reimburse households fully and would have made it subject to appropriated funds. So we were concerned with this bill that households would be left with no recourse once funds ran out from the department and would have no guarantee of getting funds reimbursed, which is just it's a really awful situation for households to be in, to show up at the grocery store and be in the checkout line and find out that they have no benefits for that month. They've all been stolen. And we're really happy with how DHS has been responding to that thus far, but we definitely want to work to prevent anybody from not being reimbursed for their stolen benefits. So we worked with a lot of advocates, including Public Justice Center, Homeless Persons Representation Project, to oppose HB 1434. And we are happy to say it did not pass out of committee. So we anticipate something like that is going to be introduced again next year. But for now, we are satisfied that that DHS will be reimbursing households fully for the remainder of this year. Oh, thanks JD for including that. Yeah, that's a really comprehensive, great report from Propel that came out today. So encourage everybody to check that out. The only other thing I'll mention is HB 183 was around the summer SNAP program and amending the summer SNAP program. Basically, long story short, the bill zeroed out any mandated appropriation for summer SNAP. And for folks who may not be familiar, summer SNAP is a Maryland-specific program that has existed for several years. That was in addition to pandemic EBT, provided $30 per month to qualifying families with children preschool through 12th grade. And it was $30 per month in the summer months and then $10 per month in December. But it was a competitive program where counties, and it does still exist. It's counties have to apply and match whatever they receive from DHS for the program. And so it was not reaching as widespread of a population of students. This year, no counties have applied for the summer SNAP program for this summer. DHS is really trying to focus their efforts on the new summer EBT program, which is otherwise known as Sunbucks. And that will be launching. We're hoping that the website for Sunbucks is going to go live any day now. When I stop talking, I'll put the URL in the chat. So the summer EBT program is supposed to reach about 500,000 students. So any student that qualifies for free or reduced price meals in the state would qualify for the summer EBT. And most households will automatically receive benefits either on their SNAP card or if they were receiving pandemic EBT on their PEBT card. So the application for Sunbucks, I believe, is going to go live in June, but that will be for a small fraction of households that will need to apply for the program because most will be automatically eligible and signed up to receive the benefits. So we're excited about summer EBT, aka Sunbucks. Happy to provide more information on that. But that was the last piece of legislation I wanted to touch on. So I'll stop there.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Especially personally for the explanation around summer EBT. I know when the bill came out at first, it was a little confusing about the differences and the things like that. So I really appreciate you clarifying that. And again, happy to share that information about Sunbucks in our follow-up as well as other communications we have. I also apologize because it sounds like my neighbor's mowing his lawn. So I hope no one has to hear that right now. I do want to open the floor up to any questions for Maryland Hunger Solutions that anyone may have before we move on to our wrap up for today's meeting. So feel free to come off mute, add to the chat, or raise your hand if there are any questions from the group. Before Michelle.
I'm sorry. I always have questions. Elizabeth, can you just touch on your coalition related to Universal School Meals for All and the leadership that you all have provided on that issue, and if folks want to join the coalition, how they can do it.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Michelle. That is an important thing to touch on. Maryland Hunger Solutions co-leads a pretty large, robust coalition of advocates on healthy school meals for all. We co-lead with the American Heart Association. The person on my team who leads our efforts on healthy school meals for all is Julia Gross. So I'll put Julia's email in the chat as well. If you are interested in signing up for the coalition, please reach out to Julia and she'll get you added. I think we're currently meeting once a month, but during session we meet weekly. We have been advocating for universal meals in Maryland. Now 2024 was our third year. So basically, learning from how great universal meals were during the pandemic, I think we really wanted to keep up that momentum and continue universal meals in Maryland. But as was mentioned by the delegate, we've been hitting some pretty big obstacles with the state budget. But we are hopeful that if we are creative and work really hard, we can hopefully get this bill passed in the next legislative session. So we definitely need as much help from advocates as we can get. And so, yeah, I'll provide some extra info in the chat about the coalition.
Just on a personal note, just huge props to the coalition. I've been able to join for the last two legislative sessions, and not only is it amazing to see kind of the different group of people that come together to form the coalition, but it's also just been really informative personally to me about how to be an advocate and how to advocate in coalitions for these types of major legislative asks that school meals for all will be, and will be again next year as we continue to do the work. So I just wanted to personally say I'm appreciative of the coalition as well for not only the work and the advocacy, but what it has taught me as well. I'm going to, as we are approaching the end of our meeting here, open it up for any final questions that anyone may have.
Or organizational updates, right?
Yeah,
or
yeah, also if anyone has any updates they'd like to share, any upcoming meetings or anything along those lines. And even if you have anything that comes up in the next day or two that you forgot to share with the group, feel free to send it to me and I can make sure it goes into the follow-up notes as well. And if there are none, that is totally okay. Before I end our meeting a few minutes early, I just wanted to drop into the chat again for those that might have joined late or were not able to hear our sign-on letter that Michelle just, I believe, just dropped into the chat. Our sign-on letter for around budget transparency when it comes to the county council within that Google form that Michelle is about to add, I believe. You can find the link to the PDF version of the full letter as well. So that I believe will be closing later this evening. So feel free to sign on until kind of the end of day. And that link will be sent over to the county council either later tonight or early tomorrow morning, because the vote will be taking place. And I also wanted to say thank you, because as this meeting has gone on, I'm seeing the sign on number increase. So thank you to those who have already signed on in the last hour of this meeting as well. We are just really, really appreciative of it. We're actually up to 20, so someone else must have just signed on, Michelle. And with that, I am going to stop our recording for the day.